A Kirblog, I made for you.
My words of truth.
I made this for all of you.
Also, I can talk about Pokemon. Welcome to Kirblog. I made for you all.
Welcome, everybody. It is December 1st, and that means it's Pokécember for Kirblogs. For those of you who didn't hear from the last one I put out celebrating the 2-year anniversary of these Kirblogs I've been doing, all month long I'm going to be doing Pokemon-themed Kirblogs all the way up until the end of the year. Because there's so much to talk about regarding this gigantic-ass franchise that I've been fully enveloped in for many, many, many years, like pretty much since the beginning. And so on that note, I thought it would be good to start off with the very, very beginning, and kind of my first experience was with Pokemon as it first came to the States. So I guess this was back in, I want to say, 1997 or so. I remember my very first exposure to this at all was back when I was reading the Nintendo Power magazine, which I was subscribed to for several years. By this point, I believe the 100th issue had come out. In fact, I was even at my friend Andrew Dickman's place a few days ago, and he had like almost every issue collected at his place, and I was reading through a bunch of them in kind of the late 90s or so, and Pokemon wasn't even out yet. It was still being referred to overall as Pocket Monsters, and the N64 had been out for a little while. But in Nintendo Power magazine, kind of in preparation for this, this massive kind of, launch of everything, the video games, the TV show, the card games, the toys, everything. They were doing this 6-part, so over the course of 6 months for every issue throughout each month, this kind of mini magazine that they were attaching to the back of each issue called Pokemon Power. It had the Nintendo Power logo, but replaced with Pokemon. And the entire thing basically had a walkthrough of the entire Red and Blue first game. It was more or less, it was kind of like a lot of the same information you'd find in the Nintendo Power strategy guide as well. This was back when Nintendo Power was producing their own strategy guides alongside Prima Games, which were doing their own as well. But so I had both the Prima and the Nintendo Power version of the Pokemon Red and Blue players guides at that time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So they had a lot of the same maps and information, everything kind of copy pasted from what eventually became the player's guide in it. And in the back of the magazine, they had some information about other parts of the franchise. Like they had fan art. They had stuff about the trading card game. They had listings for where the TV show was going to be airing, and they also had an anime-manga of the first 6 episodes of the show. So with each of those issues, they had a comic adaptation. Those of you who don't know what an anime-manga is, it's as Julian Grabowski from Daizenshu, or rather from Kanzenshu, not Daizenshu EX, back in the day used to call redundantly redundant. It's a comic that is literally just screen caps of an episode of the anime put into a comic form. But that was kind of my first exposure, and I was always kind of intrigued, as probably most kids were at that time. I found the creatures themselves to be really cool, and I didn't really, at the time, I didn't really remember who any of them were or what any of them, were supposed to be or anything like that. And I didn't know any names. And in fact, I think still for a while, I have my mom kind of to thank for 2 key moments in the early parts of this, because I said Pokemon. I was pronouncing it as Pokemon. When I was reading through the magazine, and then my mom pointed out, no, honey, that's an apostrophe on top of that E. It's Pokemon. And I was like, oh, of course, that makes sense. So she corrected me on that. And then later, one morning, I was, I went to her room just to find her before she took me to school that morning, and she was watching TV, and she was like, oh, I'm looking through some files or something right now. If you want to change the channel, sweetie. And I'm like, okay. So I was flipping through the channels. And as I'm flipping through them, I go past WB11, which is what we had for Warner Brothers in New York. I know it's different for different people, but and I see for just a brief moment as I'm flipping through the channels, Ash and Misty and Pikachu in the Pokemon Center as the smoke is filling up from Team Rocket attacking. And I'm like, wait a minute, I recognize that. And I go back, and lo and behold, it is the 2nd episode, Pokemon Emergency, airing in syndication on WB that morning. And this is before Warner Brothers had the show completely, to themselves. And I was, I was seeing that, and I was like, oh, this is that comic that I had in the back of my my Nintendo Power magazine. Oh, what is this thing anyway? So from there on, I was just kind of fully fully interested to find out what the hell this thing was. So shortly after this, I was beginning to like try to learn a little bit more because everybody at my school was, beginning to trade the cards, and a lot of people had the game and were watching the show and everything and all that. So meanwhile, in my case, I was trying to just like learn as much as I could about it because I didn't have the game yet. I distinctly remember there was one morning because I used to be at this like after school kind of program like where I'd just like hang out with some of the other kids. It was called Milk and Cookies for us, where we get a snack and then we just like hang out outside in the playground for like however many hours until our parents came to pick us up, basically. But I was, obviously as many kids did in elementary school, I used to play pretend with my friends. And we were like, oh, let's play Pokemon. And I'm just like, I don't even know how to do that. I literally don't have any like understanding of how this mysterious but beautifully colorful world with all these bajillion monster characters even works in the first place. But I remember there's Squirtle, the turtle, Charmander, the lizard, and the other one with the thing on his back. Fin Sprout is what I'm going to call him because I don't remember that his name is fucking Bulbasaur. And obviously Pikachu, but he was already taken over the world by that point. Eventually I did head over to Toys R Us, and I was bought my first copy. I got Pokemon Blue for the original Game Boy, which I had inherited from my sister. And from there on out, as with most American kids at that time, I was absolutely fucking obsessed with everything about this franchise. I couldn't even tell you, unfortunately, for a reason I'll get to later, I could not even tell you how many hours I logged into playing Pokemon Red and Blue, or rather, Blue at the time. I did eventually get a copy of Red like way later because I wanted to complete everything. So I started with Charmander, of course, as I'm sure a lot of people are probably wondering what was my starter. Started with Charmander, who I named Charmy, very original. Didn't know who Charmy the Bee was at that time, for the record. I think I might have, but not by name. Anyway, so I had Charmander. My original team of 6 on my blue versions for my very, very first Pokemon journey, my very first playthrough of any Pokemon game, if I'm remembering correctly, was I had Pidgeot, I had Lapras, I had a Machamp, I had Aerodactyl, I had a Mewtwo, and I had my level 100 Charizard, which is the only Pokemon I've ever trained all the way up until level 100. Was my fully evolved Charizard, and that was just literally from like I'm going to fight the Elite Four over and over and over and over again until I get my Charizard up to level 100, which proved to be kind of a bad thing because then way later when I got Pokemon Stadium, the N64, all of my Pokemon were not on equal levels, but in that game, all the rental Pokemon, all the opponent's Pokemon when you fight against the computer are the highest level of whatever your highest level Pokemon is. So my having a level 100 Charizard made it impossible for me to fight against anything or anyone in that game because all of the rest of my team would just be destroyed in an instant. So that wasn't incredibly smart. But my best friend at the time, who this predates Mike Lucas. For those of you who may not have seen the Donkey Kong Country Kirblog that I did, and I used to we made our own like Donkey Kong Country show that we would play pretend with or whatever. This was my friend Nick at the time. And Nick and I, of course, we're both obsessed with Pokemon at the time. We were still keeping in touch with each other. I had moved away, and just to refresh briefly, I had moved away to a different elementary school by that point, and we were still keeping in touch all the way through up until 4th grade, and then eventually we lost contact, and by 5th grade, that was when I eventually met Mike Lucas, and fully became friends with him. I met him before that, but we became best friends in 5th grade. But prior to that, Nick and I, we watched the show. We used to literally act out entire episodes of the show, from beginning to end. We just remembered the entire scripts to them by heart because they used to replay those first 50 something episodes over and over and over. It was everything from the beginning of the show all the way up into the March of the Executor Squad, I believe, was those were all of the episodes they just played in succession over and over again on syndication until eventually WB got Pokemon fully, and they continued on with season 1 from there. But and then the other thing was Nick actually helped me complete my Pokedex. We did a lot of the trading back and forth Pokemon that we had caught in order to, because you would, okay, I'll trade this and then we'll trade back so we can complete our Pokedexes and etc. We used to do a lot of that, and also to evolve the ones that had to be traded in the first place to evolve and all. a lot of that stuff and everything. So because of him, I was able to complete my Pokedex and get all 150. Now, unfortunately, I missed out on the special, I think it was a Toys R Us event of some kind, where they were giving away Mew to people who would show up with their copy of the game, and they would just give it to you somehow. I forget exactly how they did it, but I missed out on that, unfortunately. I believe it was right before Pokemon the first movie came out in theaters the following year in '99, I believe. I missed out on that, but thankfully Mike and I had an acquaintance who we actually still kind of kept in touch with all the way through high school. I think his name was Dan, who did have Mew, and I believe he was the first quote-unquote Pokemon master of our entire school, and the fact that he had all 151 Pokemon caught. And he did the thing where he would just trade it back and forth between us, and we were able to complete our Pokedexes. Unfortunately, by that point, there was so I used to go with my dad to his. He worked at a Toyota dealership as a manager, selling used cars and stuff. And I used to go with him to his work every Saturday. And unfortunately, my Game Boy and all of my original games, including the ones that because this first the big brick Game Boy and all the games that I inherited from my sister Allie. It was her Game Boy, and she had like Mario Land and a bunch of other stuff and Tetris and all that. I had them in a little Six Flags pouch. And I had my copy of Blue version with all 151 Pokemon collected on it, and it was stolen because I had a little room to myself where I was hanging out, and somebody just, I guess, came in, saw the pouch with all the shit in it, and they just took it, and I never saw any of those games again. But I did, in fact, have a 100% complete 151 Pokedex on my Blue version. I will never get it back. I think out of spite after that, on my red version, I built up like a really, really cool team that I wanted to make as awesome as possible. And I did use the rare candy trick, not for any kind of nefarious purposes. It was mainly to keep the characters all on the same level because it was a team I was specifically building for playing Pokemon Stadium. So I believe on that version I had a Charizard again, Zapdos, Vaporeon, Dugtrio, Alakazam, and unfortunately, I think Nidoking was the last one. I think that was the last one. So that was my team for the red version. I was really happy with that one because it was a good balance of just kind of everything, and I had a really killer team of Generation 1. I know Generation 1 is kind of a joke by this point, like in terms of like its technical stuff, like the battle system is so much more involved. In fact, I would even say I would probably prefer, if I were going to go back and replay the Generation 1 like world again, like Kanto, I would probably much rather just play through either Fire Red or Leaf Green again instead of playing the original Red and Blue or Yellow. Just because I like the graphical style and the kind of technical stuff that they added from the Ruby and Sapphire engine. And of course, Pokemon Gold and Silver was delayed. For those of you who don't know, back in the day, it was supposed to come out very shortly after it did, after the original game did, but there were some delays that were happening with it, so it didn't come out until I think like late 2000, maybe even 2001. I can't quite remember. But it was way after it was supposed to come out. But I was super excited about Gold and Silver, and of course I was collecting a lot of the Beckett magazines and all that and everything, and kind of keeping an eye on like what all the special stuff was going to be further down the line with keeping an eye on what all the new Pokemon were going to be. Of course, they were revealing a lot of who they were from the TV show with Togepi, and like they had Donphan and Meryl and some of them, and Snubbull in the movie as well and in the TV show. So that was a really exciting time to just, be in all this wonderment, because the sad kind of truth now is that as soon as a new Pokemon game comes out, somebody hacks into it and finds out what all the secrets are immediately. And, that's kind of been the case since, Ruby and Sapphire. Honestly, it's even been the case since Gold and Silver, because as soon as somebody got their hands on a Japanese copy of Gold and Silver, they, dumped all the data, and everybody knew who all the new Pokemon were going to be, more or less, because it was all over all the magazines and, all over the early internet, fan sites and everything. We were seeing, there's Blossom and Lugia and Ho-Oh and all this stuff. Oh, my God, So there really wasn't a whole lot of, mystery anymore, after a certain point. But back then, it still was, just because it wasn't as easy to get that kind of information out and around everywhere. And there was, again, the internet was very basic, and there weren't as many sites and reputable sources of finding out this stuff. So really it was just up to Nintendo Power to post here's a bunch of new Pokemon from the sequel coming out really soon. Oh my God, get excited, So that was exciting as well, just to
be really interested in how that was going to go and see what was going to happen with the next generation and everything. And of course, yeah, we had the movies, kind of teasing us in at the interim and everything. My parents were both unabashedly feeding this addiction of mine, in that I was collecting everything from the tapes of the TV show. I was collecting the the cards for a while. I was collecting a lot of not all the toys, obviously, not every single one of them, but particularly the 2-inch Pokemon figures. We were collecting for a long time. My dad would like playing Pokemon Stadium with me, which I've talked about like a long time ago on one of the N64 Kirblogs. And the other big thing. This is kind of the double-edged sword, but it was this is the truth. So in the 4th and 5th grade, when Pokemon first kind of hit and absolutely everybody was obsessed with it, I was basically kind of the curator of an imaginary Pokemon kind of like class-wide role play group, where basically I gave everybody in my class a starter Pokemon. And by that, I don't mean like I just gave everybody either a Charmander, a Bulbasaur, and a Squirtle. I gave like one person a Pikachu. I gave one person a Caterpie or a Spearow or a Seal or a Dratini or something. I have no idea. But basically, every single person in the class had their own Pokemon team, and like this was like a full-time like daily job of like me like curating like, okay, this is your team, these are the Pokemon that you have, and etc. And like I would like act out the battles between two different kids with like what the Pokemon were and everything, and we had like we had like pretend battles, and like I would keep score of like everybody's hit points and everything. I remember like the sort of like generic fake battle system I came up with was I would do like some kind of hand sign, like I think like the rocker, like yeah, like the fucking kiss sign with like the index finger and pinky and the thumb out was Pikachu, like for instance. And everybody I think generally would have like 5 hit points each. I'd have like the them on both hands or whatever. And I think there was also like a version of it where like in that same like after school milk and cookies type of thing that I was talking about earlier, it was like a dumbed down kind of like small version of the full playthrough of the game, where like you'd go through a bunch of different cities. There were only 4 gym leaders. I think it was like Brock, Misty, Sabrina, and maybe Blaine or something. I think maybe Giovanni, can't remember. But it was kind of set up that way where it's like I really like gave attention to every single. I'd rather they were giving me attention in return. This was before I was picked on a lot, because ultimately what it wound up being is that I was going too far with it and being way too annoying with it, and that was kind of one of the big things that I was eventually made fun of for, especially in middle school. But that said, throughout those last 2 years of elementary school through 4th grade and 5th grade, that was what everybody was doing, and everyone was super, super, super big into it. And yeah, it went on for what felt like ages, but it was just those 2 years. But by 5th grade, it got out of hand, and then I was getting like severely picked on. But the kind of offset was that I eventually met Mike Lucas and my friend, another separate friend named Nick, not the same Nick I was talking about earlier. And we were like the fucking 3 Musketeers, and we did everything we ever wanted to, and we didn't even care. So that was our whole deal with that, and it was awesome. But yeah, I guess that's a lot to take in. I'm sure there's probably like lots of other little things I'm leaving out, but I'm gonna go into other bits of this like through my checkered past of being obsessed with Pokemon on future Kirblogs. This was just kind of the sort of beginning of that's just that magical time of this is when the franchise first came to America, and how it just kind of like really took over the fucking world with like every aspect of it. Like Nintendo was smart. Like just launching every single aspect of this franchise all at the same time with everything you could possibly get all here at once. It swept the country. I never really am sure like how old like my listenership is. So to all of you guys out there, I'm not sure like, this might be completely different from you. This is why I'm very curious. I'm just going to end it here. This is kind of as far as I can go with it. In the comments below, this is kind of the rest of the topic really. I want to know all of your stories. Did you grow up with Red and Blue as, Generation 1 as your first experience with Pokemon? Or, if you're probably younger than I am, I would assume, did you grow up with Gold and Silver first, or Ruby and Sapphire, maybe even Diamond and Pearl, or Black and White? I have no idea. If you grew up with Black and White first, then you might be like 12, for Christ's sake, in which case I'm sorry if I'm destroying your virgin ears with my swearing. But that aside, tell me your story. Like, I'm actually curious. Like, or those of you who maybe are close to my age, or enough to it to where maybe you grew up with Red and Blue first. I'm curious. I want to know. Can you show me? Leave a comment about that. If you have suggestions for future Kirblog topics relating to Pokemon stuff specifically, leave a comment about that too, or include it in your story. Anything else like that you want.
I have, again, a bunch of them already picked out, so there will only be so much room for suggestions. But, if you've got a good one, let me know. I'm not sure what the next one will be. I'll decide when I get up to it, but I've got a bunch stocked away, and I hope you enjoy that. I think the next one is going to be my top 10 favorite Pokemon, actually, if I'm remembering right. I have a list somewhere, but it's not in front of me. Anyway, so tell me about your first experiences with the Pokemon franchise, whether it was with Generation 1 or Generation 8. If you're from the future and you already have the next Pokemon game, Lavender and Turquoise, I don't know. That's another topic. Don't you worry about that. That'll do it. So thank you all for listening, and I will catch you all later. Bye-bye. Catch. I just made a funny, and I didn't even mean to.